Welcome to the Joint Multinational Readiness Center Train to Win podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Joyce Costello. In this podcast, I am talking with U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Elliot Harris and Command Sgt. Major John Bamba from the Vampire team about the current fires trends at JMRC. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Harris is currently serving as the Senior Fires Trainer for JMRC. His subject matter expertise over the entire fire enterprise comes from his experience as a battalion commander, brigade executive officer, field artillery battalion operations officer, and mission command training program field artillery battalion OCT. He has worked with U.S. and multinational partners in combat and in training. Command Sergeant Major Bamba is currently serving as the senior non-commissioned officer for all field artillery and fire support at JMRC. His experience as a Field Artillery Battalion Command Sergeant Major, Field Artillery Battery First Sergeant, and Master Gunner provided him with a depth of knowledge and skill that makes him a subject matter expert in leadership and field artillery operations, fighting in decisive action and counterinsurgency operations. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Harris and Command Sergeant Major Bamba, for joining us. So we have the recent fire trends at JMRC in front of us, and let's go ahead and look at the top four. So from what I understand, massing fires is a trend here at JMRC.
We continue to see a struggle with battalions being able to effectively mass fires on the battlefield. And so, as we look at massing fires, I think it's really how we define that and really understand what it is we're trying to do. I believe massing fires can be leveraging fires from across the entire battalion, or two battalions or two batteries, or even joint fires with respect to our ability to leverage our close combat and attack aviation, and then also our Air Force CAS platforms as well. So it's how are we able to do that? And I think a lot of the struggles that we see with the inability to mass fires, I would say, are tied to really two things. Within our planning process, we make the decisions with where we want to mass to be able to get those desired effects. And so that's really, the planning process is that commander-centric process that allows us to, identify the objectives that we want to achieve against a specific formation and then mass those fires on that. And so that decision has to be made within the planning process. And then the second part of that is, do we have our guns in the right position with the right ammunition to be able to support and enable the massing of fires on those specific targets? And so in order to achieve that, really, again, that goes back to our planning process and how we're building and synchronizing those efforts. The next thing that really drives our ability to mass is the guidances that we're building within our digital fires platforms. So as we build our guidances within our AFATADs, are we structuring our attack guidance matrix so that, as we identify a 2S19 battery, that those desired effects are accurately conveyed and then also processed throughout the system. And so that's really our biggest challenge with respect to being able to mass.
Okay, sir, so following up on that, why is it important that we mass fires?
So as you look at our ability to mass fires, I think the effects of 18 rounds from an artillery battalion impacting near simultaneously on a target, will create a significantly larger effect and send a clear message. And so, as we look at our ability to mass, massing, really allows us to spread the volume of fires and the rate of fires with which we're going to execute our fires plan out across the entire battalion. If we just choose one battery or one platoon with which to mass, we've now created logistics problems within a platoon or a battery that might force us to resupply that battery sooner, as opposed to through the normal progression and normal resupply triggers that we've identified through our planning process. The other thing, as you look at it from a survivability perspective, every round we fire, the safe assumption is that it's been acquired through some type of target acquisition radar. And so by massing the entire battalion, you're creating multiple signatures as opposed to one signature that really will get in the enemy's decision cycle and force them to make a determination of where they're going to mass their fires or how they're going to respond to our fires. As we look at recent trends, about 9 to 11% of the missions where a battalion could mass at JMRC have resulted in the battalion actually massing. And a lot of that goes back to what I've mentioned before. Did we have the guidances built into our system, and did we allow those guidances to do the thinking for us? And did we accurately follow the commander's targeting guidance with respect to target selection standards and our attack guidance matrix? And so if we're doing that, then that number should be higher because it's all based off that desired effect that the commander wants to achieve. And a lot of times what we're seeing are that we have individuals at the battalion and battery level that are making decisions not to mass. And again, I think it goes back to either the inability to because our guidances weren't properly structured, or we didn't have the right ammunition on the guns to be able to support the target, or the last thing is we didn't have our guns in either range or in position ready to fire to be able to mass. And so I think that's really how we see the ability to mass here. And a lot of this I think can be trained at home station training. One of the things you'll probably hear me say a lot is that I think good quality home station training is the answer to a lot of the trends and the challenges that we see at JMRC and really across all of the combat training centers. So if we're doing quality home station training where we're reinforcing and training the principles of mass and focusing our efforts on massing the entire battalion at every opportunity, then I think we build that repetition and that muscle memory that forces us and allows us to do that as we're going through a rotation.
So, sir, the field artillery battalions at JMRC have sometimes remained challenged when it comes to respect to the execution of the military decision-making process and targeting. Can you talk us more about that trend, please?
Yes, I think so. A lot of what really drives our inability to execute the MDMP process efficiently and effectively is our understanding of the process. And I'll talk with respect to how we're getting through the process and how we're executing the process, and then I'll hand it over to Sergeant Major Bamba to talk a little bit more about that. But as we look at the MDMP process, I think we understand and we know the steps of the process. It's really understanding what our inputs are to each step of the process, and then within each step, what actions we have to take to get to those desired outputs of the targeting process. And I think it's important to highlight the MDMP process is one of those processes that builds upon itself. So if you struggle through mission analysis and you don't get to a good product with respect to mission analysis, it's going to lead to challenges throughout the entire process. So, it's important that we're educating, that we're, again, getting those quality repetitions in that allow us to train the process, execute the process, and know what the outputs are of the process and be able to get to those. As we look at, our junior officers that are part of the process and really a part of that Field Artillery Battalion staff, they are the ones that while they're getting MDMP through the Captain's Career Course and through other areas, it's really a self-development aspect that goes along with it. I believe we really only scratched the surface in PME with respect to our ability to understand and execute the MDMP process. There just has to be continued repetitions of it. So one of the things that I've seen good units do to build depth and proficiency within the MDMP process is be able to train it and train it repeatedly. So every event that you're going to do within the Field Artillery Battalion, treat it as a part, as an operation, and execute the operations process, and the MDMP process is a part of that. We can also leverage our digital simulation centers that we have at each post to be able to continue to get that training with respect to the MDMP process. And then the last thing I would touch before I turn it over to Sergeant Major Bamba is that probably the biggest challenge is being able to plan in a time-constrained environment where you've got the friction and fog of war, and you're focused on not only planning, but you're also running current operations. And so I think for a field artillery battalion that becomes a challenge because we're not necessarily MTO planner, and we don't have the capability nor the depth to be able to do both things well. So again, I think those repetitions that we will do at home station will allow us to be able to execute good quality MDMP as we go into a rotation. And I'll turn it over to Sergeant Major Bamba to be able to really allow him the opportunity to expand upon this as well, because he has a non-commissioned officer perspective that I know he'd like to add.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. In addition to the MDMP process, oftentimes we do not bring the NCO. We fail to bring the NCO into the equation. Many times, similarly to what you just discussed, NCOs rarely get any type of training or value training from NCO PDS, Professional Development System. So I think we need to place a higher emphasis on NCO's role in the MDMP process. Thank you very much, sir.
So how does targeting play into what you were talking about?
Yep. So I think targeting is an extension of the MDMP process and really weaves its way through the MDMP process. But that targeting process is a way in which we continue to synchronize and leverage our effects and our platforms our assets that we have over time after we've completed the operations process. And so, as we look at targeting, there are some challenges and struggles, much like what I talked about with MDMP, that I think transcend not only the MDMP process but also targeting. It's getting all the members of the targeting team to understand what their role is in that targeting process. And so, as we look at that, the targeting is occurring at the brigade level. So it's getting the brigade staff and the whole brigade staff involved in the targeting process. And very much like what I talked about with the MDMP, there are some struggles with us understanding what we have to bring to the fight and how we're going to leverage those tools to be able to get us to an output, which is a target synchronization matrix, a revised target list worksheet, and the other fire support products that we have to build that keep up with and evolve at the pace of the current operations fight. And so as we look at the challenges within the targeting process, I think there are a couple things that are worth exploring. The first is the depth and understanding of the targeting process across the brigade staff. Earlier I talked about within PME we discuss and we go through the MDMP process. Well, I would offer to you that within professional military education at all levels, that we don't talk targeting as much as we should or could. And so, what I'd like to highlight there is, our 131 alphas, they get a very extensive, indoctrination into targeting and how to be able to do it. I believe that our 13 alphas, so our field artillery captains and lieutenants, are getting a little bit of familiarization with how to target. But really, when you look at a brigade staff, it's predominantly comprised of majors across all warfighting functions. And that's our biggest gap, is ensuring that those individuals are educated on the targeting process and what they bring to the fight. And so we've got to do a couple things. We've got to educate the entire team on what it is the targeting process is about, and help fill the gaps that are created or aren't necessarily identified or addressed in PME. And so one of the things that when we talk targeting, you've got to do a targeting teach with the entire brigade staff. Make sure they understand really how the brigade is going to conduct the targeting process, and understand what those outputs are of that targeting process. And so I think that's where we start at. It's starting with that targeting teach, which enables that common understanding. After we've done that, then it's really getting those repetitions in. And much like the MDMP process, targeting is a commander-centric process. So every time you get a new commander, you've got to understand how it is that they view targeting, how they process the information, and what it is that you've got to do to ensure that they understand the targeting process. The next thing is, how are we extracting their guidance from them? And some brigade commanders do a really great job of giving their commanders guidance and their targeting priorities and the desired effects that they want to see on formations and targets. Others, we have to extract it. So it's really that FIS Cord understanding how is he going to pull that information from that brigade commander, and then he's got to convey that to the entire targeting team so that they understand how they're going to enable and achieve the commander's desired targeting objectives. And so that's the most important thing there, is educating that staff. If we've done that and we get the quality repetitions in and understand how to do this, then this becomes an easy process. The last thing with respect to targeting that I think becomes a challenge is, once we've done all those things that I just mentioned, then we've got to take all the documents that are revised and refined through the targeting process, and we've got to get those out to the current operations. And we struggle to be able to do that. Some of it's just based off the time it takes us to produce these documents, and then the rest of it is make sure we're getting them out to the current operations floor, and the ones that are going to execute those effects. So it's how are we doing that, and what's the time frame associated with that? So as 7th ATC commander talks about quite a bit, I think there are a couple forums to be able to do that, and I think our OpSync is the forum in which we get our targeting products out into the current operations fight. But it takes some time, and really you've got to have the right players that are a part of that operation sync and understand the importance of targeting to be able to get those products out and be able to address them.
So you mentioned synchronization of resources earlier. So this kind of makes sense why some units who come to JMRC are struggling to manage ammo. Can you elaborate on this third trend of ammunition management, please, sir?
So within ammunition management, units are challenged with being able to effectively manage and forecast the ammunition required across the operation. And we talked earlier about the MDMP process. We talked about the targeting process. And, as we're looking at ammunition management within the MDMP process, we really got to, as we're going through, our IPB, develop, what does the enemy look like? And, so what is that order of battle that allows us to understand the number of targets that we're going to shoot? And, here at JMRC, we like to really try to stress that the unit plan for not only their HPTLs, so those targets on their high payoff target list that they want to achieve a desired effect against. So once they start thinking through that, that'll give them an understanding of some of the ammunition they need. But then there's also targets of opportunity that will present themselves on the battlefield that might not necessarily be aligned against the HPTL, but something that your commander makes a decision that he wants to have an effect on. So that then adds to our already identified ammunition allocation and the ammunition that we need to be able to leverage. And then once you've done that, you've kind of got to think through your combat loss. As we go through wargaming, which I would say is probably just as important as mission analysis, but as we go through that wargaming, we're going to factor in combat loss, but not only at the battery level, but also at the battalion level. So there's the potential that our CTCP could be affected by enemy artillery, or also by direct fire. Same with our artillery batteries. The safe assumption is that our artillery batteries, because they're shooting, and as I mentioned earlier, they potentially are being detected through our through adversarial radars. Now we have counterfire, and that counterfire can result and generate a loss of ammunition as well. So by factoring in those areas right there, it allows us to identify our true artillery ammunition requirement. And so we've got to do that as we go through the MDMP process and the planning process to be able to identify that. The next thing I think units are challenged with and struggle with is understanding their haul capacity. So the MTO dictates and allows, the vehicles and platforms with which we have to operate, and there's only a finite amount of space across both our FSC and then also within our firing batteries for ammunition hauling capacity. And so, we've got to prioritize ammunition, and we've got to understand the triggers with which we're going to execute ammunition resupply. Again, I think that's part of the MDMP process where we do that. And once we've done that, then it's, rehearsing those triggers and thinking through those combat configured loads that we have to support field artillery tasks that we're going to be responsible for by phase or by critical event, so that we have that ammunition on the guns or at the right place at the right time so that we can conduct a quick resupply. And the last thing with respect to our ammunition management is, this isn't just a field artillery problem. This is a brigade problem. So we have to work very closely with our BSB and specifically our SPO ammo to ensure they understand, how we're ordering ammunition, how we're storing ammunition, and what that ammunition needs to look like with respect to combat configured loads when it's leaving the BSA and coming forward to the Field Artillery Battalion. And if we can get them on our team and we can build that synchronization and collective teamwork between the BSB and the Field Artillery Battalion, ammunition management becomes a much easier problem. And I know Sergeant Major Bamba has a couple points he'd like to make with respect to this. So.
Yes, sir. In reference to ammunition management, a challenge that we face here at JMRC is ammunition replication and the use of simulation or notional ammunition. As evident when units come through this rotation, having actual ammunition is a lot easier to manage rather than having notional ammunition. Also, units continue to struggle with a single point of failure when in relation to ammo management. Oftentimes, there is only one person in a unit that is actually monitoring the ammunition, and more people monitoring ammunition, more soldiers monitoring ammunition will, like Lieutenant Colonel Harris mentioned, assist the units with their ammunition management.
And so Sergeant Major Bamba brings up a great point with respect to who all's involved in the ammunition management process. At the Field Artillery Battalion level, there are multiple people that play a role in this. And who I would specifically highlight are, first and foremost, the Battalion S4, or if you're lucky enough to have a battalion ammunition officer, those are two of the most important people in this process, because they're the ones that are helping the distro platoon and the FSC understand, when that ammo needs to be there. But the other person that's critical in this is our fire direction officer. And so that fire direction officer working closely with the S3 to anticipate and understand the triggers with which we need to get ammunition to the guns so that we can execute our assigned field artillery task is important. So, really this ammunition management, it isn't, a single person, but it's a collective team. And, as Sergeant Major Bamba talked about, that single point of failure, where we see that single point of failure happen is at the battery level. That ammunition team chief may be the only one that knows the ammunition on that respective cat or that gun. And so it's got to be deeper than that. It's a collective team effort. So at Echelon, understanding the ammunition and what we have on hand and how we get ammunition from, the division to the brigade ATHP, and from the brigade ammunition holding area to the combat trains, and then subsequently to the field artillery battery. That process is one that we've got to rehearse, and we've got to understand the timing associated with that, because these are echelons that are separated by distance, and so getting that ammunition there isn't going to happen immediately. And so, again, it goes back to triggers, understanding those triggers and defining those and clearly articulating them so that everyone knows when the ammunition needs to be where it has to be able to shoot it.
So, gentlemen, how can units better prepare for ammunition management?
So much like what I've talked about with some other key points I've made here, it goes back to home station training. So as I go back to my days as a battalion S3, and I think through ammunition management, it was really the ammunition with which was in the ASP at the time, and the ammunition I needed to be able to do my artillery tables or whatnot. And so I didn't necessarily build in the multiple lots or multiple ammunition types, or to be able to think through those hauling capacity issues or the multiple lot requirements that we have. And so at home station training, if we start forcing and stressing ammunition management and stress it at echelon. So as I mentioned earlier, getting the BSB involved in our field artillery battalion training, so that they're tracking and monitoring the ammunition that we're receiving from the BSA, and that they're also thinking through the consumption reports and the 581 ammunition request that have to go along with our ammunition management processes. They're doing those. And sometimes I would say maybe the first time we're seeing this is potentially at a brigade level FTX, but really whenever you come to a CTC rotation. And so that's way too late in the game. We should be stressing this, as we're getting into our platoon level collective training, and then also, platoon, battery, battalion, and brigade level collective training. So it's really that continued home station training that we have to be able to do. And you'll notice a trend that I mentioned throughout this a lot is how do we get better at this? Is through home station training. And I believe for the four things that we've talked about today, our ability to mass, our understanding of the MDMP process, to include the extension of the targeting process, and then our ammunition management, it really goes back to home station training. So, as we're building and designing our artillery-specific battalion training to include our artillery tables, this is all a part of it. And when you look at battalion mess, it should be one. It's one of the things that we have to do within our tables, and we've got to identify how we're doing it and how well are we doing it, and are we doing it at every opportunity that we have. With respect to the MDMP process, it's the same thing. That's a part of our tables, and again, I think we've just got to continue to stress it and train it and educate, and we've got to do it in a time-constrained environment. Going back to my days as an S3, I felt I had all the time in the world to plan because I would plan well in advance of a training opportunity, and we'd do MDMP 2 to 3 weeks before that. So what's really important is, and you'll see it all the time in the box, we get a good quality repetition the first time around, but when we're in the box and we've been doing 24-hour operations for 6 or 7 days, and we've got to change a mission where we've got to execute the MDMP process, we struggle to be able to do that effectively because the conditions have changed and we haven't trained to those conditions. So I think that's what you've got to do within your home station training is change the conditions, and when we feel we've mastered with the current conditions, what conditions can we change to make the complexity more difficult and get the same result or better results. And so once you're able to do that, now you're taking training to the next level, and when you come to a CTC, it should be easy.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. We look forward to future podcasts about more fire trends at JMRC. And thank you for tuning in to the Joint Multinational Readiness Center Train to Win podcast. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so you can hear all about the forefront of training at combat training centers.